The gunshot echoed through the dusty main street of Willa Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878, shattering the peaceful afternoon as Bethany Knight ducked behind an overturned water trough, her honey blonde hair escaping its pins. The bullet had missed her by inches, embedding itself in the wooden storefront behind where she'd been standing just moments before. That woman is nothing but trouble. Sheriff Douglas Halley shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at Bethany as he emerged from his office, badge glinting in the harsh sunlight. She started this whole mess. Bethany's temper flared hotter than the Arizona sun. I did no such thing. That snake Randall tried to rob me. The sheriff scowled, not believing a word. Most folks in town had already made up their minds about the spirited young woman who'd arrived 6 months ago to take over her late uncle's general store. Independent women weren't exactly welcomed with open arms in Willa Creek. That's when the stranger spoke up. He'd been watching the scene unfold from his position outside the saloon, leaning against a post with the casual confidence of a man who'd seen his share of trouble. "Then start with me," the cowboy drawled, pushing himself away from the post and stepping into the street. His tall frame cast a long shadow as he approached, dark hat pulled low over eyes that missed nothing. "Let's see who ends first." Bethany studied the newcomer. His weathered face suggested he was around 30, though the hard lines around his eyes hinted at experiences beyond his years. Despite the trail dust on his clothes, there was something refined about him, the way he carried himself, perhaps. "And just who might you be?" The sheriff demanded, hand hovering near his holster. "Name's Kieran Addison," the cowboy replied, tipping his hat slightly. "Just passing through." Sheriff Halley narrowed his eyes. "Well, Mr. Addison, I suggest you keep on passing. This doesn't concern you." "Seems it does now," Kieran replied evenly, his gaze moving between the sheriff and Bethany. "I don't much like seeing a lady accused without cause." "You don't know what you're talking about, stranger," the sheriff snapped. "This woman has been nothing but trouble since she arrived." Bethany straightened her spine and stepped out from behind the water trough, brushing dust from her practical blue skirt. "That's a lie, and you know it, Sheriff. I've done nothing wrong except refuse to sell my store to your friend Mr. Garrison." The sheriff's face reddened. "Is that what this is about?" Kieran asked, a dangerous edge to his voice. Forcing a woman out of her rightful property, people had begun to gather on the boardwalks, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Willa Creek hadn't seen this much excitement since the stagecoach robbery last spring. "This isn't your business, cowboy," the sheriff warned. "Move along before I decide you're disturbing the peace." Kieran didn't budge. Instead, he turned to Bethany. "Madam, why don't you tell me what happened?" Before she could answer, the saloon doors swung open and a burly man staggered out, his face twisted with rage. "There she is. That's the bitch who pulled a gun on me." "I only pulled my derringer after you tried to force your way behind my counter," Bethany shot back. "And watch your language, Mr. Randall." Kieran assessed the situation quickly. The drunk man, Randall, was clearly lying. His eyes couldn't focus properly, and there was a predatory look about him that set Kieran's teeth on edge. The sheriff seemed more interested in intimidation than justice, and the beautiful store owner had the look of someone who'd been fighting her battles alone for too long. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" Kieran asked Bethany, ignoring both the sheriff and the drunk. "My store is just there," she replied, pointing to Knight's General Goods across the street. "Nobody's going anywhere," the sheriff interjected. "Miss Knight, you're coming with me to answer for threatening a customer with a firearm." "She'll do no such thing," Kieran stated firmly. "Not without proper charges and evidence." The sheriff's hand moved to his gun. "I'm starting to think you might need a night in my jail too, stranger." The tension was broken by the arrival of Judge Henderson, an elderly but respected figure in Willa Creek. He tapped his walking stick impatiently against the dirt. "What's all this commotion, Sheriff? I can hear the shouting from my chambers." Sheriff Halley straightened immediately. "Just dealing with a disturbance, Your Honor. Miss Knight here pulled a gun on Mr. Randall in her store." "Only after he tried to grab me," Bethany protested. The judge peered over his spectacles at the drunken Randall, who was now having trouble standing upright. "Mr. Randall appears to be 3 sheets to the wind, Sheriff. Hardly a reliable witness." But Your Honor, I suggest everyone cool down, the judge continued. Miss Knight, return to your store. Mr. Randall, sober yourself up. Sheriff, come see me in my office. His tone left no room for argument. As the judge led the reluctant sheriff away, Bethany exhaled shakily. The crowd began to disperse. The entertainment over for now. Thank you, she said to Kieran, though I didn't need rescuing. Didn't look that way to me, he replied with the ghost of a smile, but I admire a woman who can handle herself. Bethany studied him more carefully. His clothes were dusty but well made, and the revolver at his hip looked well maintained. Not a drifter then, but not a typical cowhand either. You still haven't explained why you got involved, Mr. Addison. Let's just say I have a problem with bullies, he answered, his eyes tracking the sheriff's retreating figure. And it seems to me that Willa Creek has more than its share. Bethany couldn't argue with that assessment. Would you like to come in for some coffee? It's the least I can offer after your intervention. Kieran hesitated, then nodded. Coffee sounds good, and maybe you can tell me what's really going on in this town. Inside the general store, Bethany moved efficiently behind the counter, where a small stove kept a pot of coffee warm throughout the day. The shop was well organized and clean, stocked with everything from dry goods to tools, clothing to medicines. Nice place, Kieran commented, removing his hat to reveal dark hair with a slight wave to it. Your uncle's, you said. Yes, Uncle Morris left it to me when he passed last year. I arrived in February to claim my inheritance. She handed him a steaming cup. The sheriff and some of the town's more traditional minds haven't exactly welcomed a woman business owner. Kieran sipped the strong coffee appreciatively. And this Garrison fellow wants to buy you out. Edmund Garrison owns most of the buildings in town already. He made what he called a generous offer when I first arrived. Her eyes flashed with determination. It wasn't generous, and even if it had been, this store is my home now. I have nowhere else to go. No family back east. No. Her response was clipped, suggesting she didn't want to elaborate. Kieran respected her privacy. So Garrison enlisted the sheriff to make your life difficult, hoping you'd give up and sell. That's my theory, though I can't prove it. She leaned against the counter. What brings you to Willa Creek, Mr. Addison? We don't get many travelers who aren't just passing through to Tucson. I'm looking for someone, he replied after a moment's hesitation. A man named Victor Crane. Heard he might be in these parts. Bethany frowned slightly. The name's not familiar, but I haven't met everyone in the county yet. She studied his face. Is he a friend? No, Kieran said, his voice hardening. He's not a friend. Before Bethany could inquire further, the bell above the door jingled as a young boy of about 10 rushed in. Miss Knight, Miss Knight. Sheriff's telling everyone you started a shootout in the street. The boy's eyes widened when he spotted Kieran. Are you the gunslinger who stood up to Sheriff Halley? Bethany sighed. Tommy Matthews, you know better than to spread gossip. There was no shootout, and Mr. Addison is not a gunslinger. Actually, Tommy continued excitedly, Pa says he heard you're Kieran Addison, the bounty hunter who brought in the Carson brothers last year in New Mexico territory. Bethany's gaze snapped to Kieran's face, which remained impassive except for a slight tightening around his mouth. Your pa talks too much, Kieran told the boy, though not unkindly, and you should listen to Miss Knight about spreading tales. Tommy looked disappointed but nodded. Yes, sir. Ma sent me for some sugar and coffee, Miss Knight. As Bethany served the boy, Kieran moved to the window, watching the street with the vigilance of someone accustomed to danger. The revelation of his profession explained a lot: his confidence, the way he carried himself, the quality gun at his hip. Once Tommy had left with his purchases, Bethany approached Kieran. A bounty hunter, former, he clarified. I gave it up 6 months ago. Except you're tracking this Victor Crane, she pointed out. That's personal. Bethany recognized the finality in his tone. Well, Mr. Addison, I appreciate your assistance today, but I wouldn't want to keep you from your business. Kieran turned from the window. Do incidents like today happen often? Often enough, she admitted, though usually it's just threats and intimidation, not gunshots. Where do you live, Miss Knight? The question caught her off guard. I have rooms above the store. Alone, Mr. Addison, Kieran, he corrected. And I'm asking because you've made enemies of the sheriff and this Garrison fellow. That's a dangerous position for anyone, especially a woman alone, Bethany bristled. I can take care of myself. I don't doubt that, he said, and she was surprised to hear sincerity in his voice, but even the most capable person sometimes needs an ally. Something in his steady gaze made Bethany reconsider her defensiveness. Perhaps it was the genuine concern she saw there, or maybe it was simply that she'd been fighting her battles alone for so long that the prospect of help, even temporary, was tempting. Are you offering to be my ally, Mr. Kieran? I am, he said simply. At least until I find Crane, it seems to me we might be able to help each other. How so? I need information about the area and its people. You need someone to watch your back while you stand your ground. And, he added with the hint of a smile, I could use a place to stay that isn't the saloon. Bethany considered his proposal. Having a bounty hunter, former or otherwise, as an ally could certainly discourage further harassment. And despite having just met him, something about Kieran Addison inspired trust. There's a small room off the back storeroom, she said finally. It's not much, but it's private. You can stay there in exchange for helping around the store. Deal, Kieran agreed, extending his hand. When Bethany took it, she was struck by the strength and warmth of his grip and the unexpected current that passed between them at the contact. From the slight widening of his eyes, Kieran had felt it too. She withdrew her hand quickly. I should warn you, association with me might make you unpopular in certain circles. Miss Knight, I've been unpopular in far more dangerous places than Willa Creek, Arizona. For the first time that day, Bethany found herself smiling. Please call me Bethany. Their arrangement began that very afternoon. Kieran brought his few possessions from his horse at the livery and settled into the sparse back room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chair, and hooks for his clothing. More importantly, it had a separate entrance that allowed him to come and go without passing through the store. By closing time, Kieran had already made himself useful by repairing a loose floorboard, organizing a shipment of tools that had arrived the previous day, and intimidating a pair of Garrison's men who'd come by with thinly veiled threats about accidents happening to businesses that didn't have proper protection. They won't be back anytime soon, Kieran remarked as he watched them hurry away. No, but they'll report to Garrison, Bethany said, locking the front door as the last rays of sunlight slanted through the windows. He'll know I've got help now. Good, let him worry for a change. Bethany led the way upstairs to her living quarters, a comfortably furnished set of rooms with windows overlooking both the main street and the alley behind the store. The main room served as both parlor and dining room, with a small kitchen area at one end and two doors leading to what Kieran assumed were a bedroom and perhaps a washroom. It's not much, but it's home, Bethany said, lighting the lamps as darkness fell. I hope you like stew. I made a pot this morning before opening the store. Stew sounds perfect, Kieran replied, realizing he hadn't eaten since dawn. As Bethany heated the meal, she asked, Will you tell me about this man you're tracking? I might be able to help if I know what or who I'm looking for. Kieran was silent for so long that Bethany thought he might refuse to answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice flat. Victor Crane was once my partner. We hunted bounties together for 3 years. 8 months ago, he betrayed me during a capture, left me for dead, and took the bounty money for himself after killing an innocent woman who got in his way. Bethany paused in her stirring, turning to face him. I'm sorry. The woman was a young widow with a small son, Kieran continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point. She'd offered us food and shelter while we waited for our quarry. Crane killed her because she recognized him from a wanted poster. The boy saw it happen. My God, Bethany whispered. What happened to the child? I survived Crane's attack and managed to get the boy to his grandparents in Santa Fe. Then I started tracking Crane. I've been following his trail for months, and it led you here. Reports place him in this area within the last month. He's smart, changes his appearance, uses different names, but he has habits he can't break: gambling, expensive whiskey, women. Bethany turned back to the stove, processing this information. I'll keep my ears open. People talk freely in a general store, especially to someone they don't consider a threat. Over dinner, they spoke of less grim subjects. Kieran told her about growing up on a small ranch in Colorado, losing his parents to influenza as a teenager, and drifting through various jobs before becoming a bounty hunter. "And you?" he asked. "What brought you all the way from the east to Arizona territory?" Bethany hesitated, then decided that if Kieran had trusted her with his story, she could share hers. "I was a schoolteacher in Boston. When my fiancé died in a factory accident 2 years ago, I had nowhere to go. His family blamed me for encouraging him to take the job." "How could that be your fault?" James came from wealth but wanted to understand how things were made, how businesses operated from the ground up. A sad smile touched her lips. He was idealistic that way. His family wanted him to simply manage their investments from a distance. "When he died, they made it clear I wasn't welcome. So you came west when your uncle died. Uncle Morris was my only remaining family. We corresponded regularly, but I hadn't seen him since I was a girl," she sighed. "When I received the letter from his lawyer about the inheritance, it seemed like providence, a chance to start over somewhere new, only to find new troubles waiting. Life is never simple, is it?" Bethany said with a rueful smile, "but I refuse to be driven away from what's rightfully mine. I've started over once already, I won't do it again." Kieran found himself admiring her determination. In his experience, most people, men included, would have folded under the kind of pressure Garrison and the sheriff were applying. "Well," he said, raising his coffee cup in a small toast, "here's to standing your ground. And to unexpected allies," she added, touching her cup to his. As they cleaned up after the meal, Kieran noticed how efficiently they moved around each other in the small space, as if they'd been sharing quarters for months, rather than hours. It was a comfortable feeling, dangerously so for a man who'd spent years avoiding attachments. "I'll make a circuit of the area before turning in," he told her as he strapped on his gun belt. "Check for any unwelcome visitors. Do you think that's necessary? Probably not, but it's better to be cautious. Garrison strikes me as the type who might escalate when challenged." When Kieran returned from his patrol of the perimeter, finding nothing suspicious, Bethany was waiting with a spare key to the back entrance. "In case you need to come or go when the store is closed," she explained. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the key, creating that same unexpected spark he'd felt earlier. Kieran watched her cheeks flush slightly in the lamplight and wondered if she was as aware of him as he was becoming of her. "Thank you, Bethany. Sleep well." "You too, Kieran." As he settled into his small room behind the store, Kieran tried to dismiss the warmth that had spread through him at her smile. He was here to find Crane and to help Bethany with her troubles, nothing more. Attachment meant vulnerability, and in his line of work, that could be fatal. Still, as sleep claimed him, it was Bethany's determined blue eyes rather than Crane's face that filled his mind. The next morning, Bethany woke to the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly in a practical green calico dress and pinned her hair in its usual simple style before heading to the kitchen. She was surprised to find Kieran there, frying eggs and bacon on the stove. "Good morning," he said, glancing up. "Hope you don't mind, I'm an early riser." "Not at all, though I'm not used to having breakfast made for me. It's the least I can do for the lodging. Coffee's ready." They ate together as sunlight gradually filled the room, discussing the day ahead. Bethany explained her usual routine, opening the store at 8, closing for an hour at noon, then remaining open until 6, except on Saturdays when she closed at 8 to accommodate the workers who could only shop after their workday ended. "Wednesdays and Saturdays are usually my busiest days," she explained. "That's when the ranch hands from the surrounding properties come into town for supplies." "Perfect," Kieran nodded. "More people means more chances to gather information about Crane." "What will you do while I'm minding the store?" Ask questions around town. Carefully, of course. I don't want to alert Crane if he's nearby. After breakfast, Kieran helped her open the store, moving heavy crates of merchandise with an ease that Bethany found herself appreciating perhaps more than was proper. There was something about the way his shoulders strained against his shirt as he lifted. She shook herself mentally. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for a man whose life clearly involved constant danger and movement. The morning passed quickly. Word of yesterday's confrontation had spread, bringing in curious customers who wanted to see the woman who'd stood up to Sheriff Hallie and perhaps catch a glimpse of her mysterious defender. Bethany answered their questions diplomatically while Kieran made himself scarce, slipping out the back to begin his inquiries around town. Around 11, the bell above the door jangled, and Bethany looked up to see Edmund Garrison himself entering the store. In his 50s, Garrison had the well-fed look of a successful businessman, his suit expensive despite the frontier setting. Two of his men flanked him, the same pair Kieran had intimidated the previous day. "Miss Knight," Garrison greeted her with exaggerated politeness. "I hope this morning finds you well, Mr. Garrison," Bethany acknowledged coolly. "What can I help you with today? I heard about yesterday's unfortunate incident with Sheriff Hallie." He clicked his tongue in apparent sympathy. Such a volatile situation could have ended much worse. Indeed. Thankfully, Judge Henderson was able to bring some reason to the situation. Garrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The judge won't always be around to intervene, my dear. Willa Creek can be a dangerous place for a woman alone." The threat was thinly veiled, but before Bethany could respond, the rear door opened and Kieran entered, carrying a crate of merchandise. He set it down deliberately before turning to face Garrison. "Miss Knight isn't alone," he stated simply. Garrison's eyes narrowed as he assessed this new player. "And you are a friend," Kieran replied, moving to stand beside Bethany at the counter. "One who believes strongly in a person's right to their property." "I see." Garrison straightened his already perfect waistcoat. "Well, Miss Knight, my offer to purchase this establishment remains open. In fact, I'm willing to increase it by 10% given the recent disturbances that might affect your business." "The disturbances you've orchestrated, you mean?" Bethany asked pointedly. Garrison's face hardened. "I'd be careful with such accusations. They could be considered slanderous." "Only if they're false," Kieran interjected. Tension crackled in the air as Garrison and Kieran locked gazes. Finally, Garrison turned back to Bethany. "Think about my offer, Miss Knight. Willa Creek is growing, and this property would be better utilized as part of my new hotel project. Progress can't be stopped. It's better to profit from it than stand in its way." With that, he nodded curtly and left, his men following close behind. "Charming fellow," Kieran remarked dryly once they'd gone. "That's the first time he's threatened me personally," Bethany said, realizing her hands were trembling slightly. "Usually he sends his men or works through the sheriff. He's escalating because you're not backing down." Kieran studied her face. "Are you all right?" "Yes, just angry." She took a deep breath. "Did you learn anything this morning?" Kieran allowed the change of subject. "Nothing about cranes specifically, but I did gather some interesting information about our friend Garrison. It seems he's leveraged himself heavily for this hotel project. If he can't secure all the properties he needs, including yours, he stands to lose a significant investment." "That would explain his growing desperation," Bethany mused. "But it doesn't give him the right to harass and threaten me." "No, it doesn't," Kieran agreed grimly. "And I think it's time we made that clear." "What do you mean?" "I mean we need to send a message that intimidation won't work. Tonight after closing, I'll stand guard here while you get some rest. I have a feeling Garrison might try to escalate further." Kieran's instincts proved correct. Just after midnight, he detected movement in the alley behind the store. Silently, he positioned himself near the rear door, gun drawn, listening to the unmistakable sounds of someone trying to force the lock. When the door creaked open, Kieran was waiting. He grabbed the intruder by the collar and slammed him against the wall, pressing his revolver under the man's chin. "Give me one reason not to pull this trigger," he growled. The would-be burglar was young, barely 20, and terrified. "Don't shoot, please. Who sent you?" Kieran demanded, though he already knew the answer. "G. Garrison," the young man stammered. "He just wanted me to scare the lady, maybe start a small fire to smoke her out. Nothing serious. A fire." Kieran pressed the gun harder against the man's throat. "You call that nothing serious?" "What's happening?" Bethany's voice came from the doorway leading to the store. She held a lantern aloft, her hair loose around her shoulders and a shawl hastily wrapped over her nightgown. "Our friend here was about to commit arson on Garrison's orders," Kieran explained, not relaxing his grip on the terrified youth. Bethany's face paled. He wanted to burn me out, just to scare you, the young man babbled. Mr. Garrison said not to hurt anyone, just make it clear the store wasn't safe no more. What's your name, boy? Kieran demanded. Billy Tanner. Well, Billy Tanner, you have two choices. One, I drag you to the judge right now and charge you with attempted arson, which will earn you several years in territorial prison. Or two, you go straight to Garrison and tell him that if he tries anything like this again, I'll personally ensure he regrets it. Which will it be? The second one. I'll tell him, I swear. Kieran released him but kept his gun trained on the young man. Get going then. And Billy, if I see you around this store again, I won't be so merciful. Billy nodded frantically and bolted into the night. Kieran secured the door before turning to Bethany. Are you all right? She nodded, though her face was still pale in the lamplight. He really would have burned my store, my home. Some men care about nothing but their own interests, Kieran said grimly. Garrison is clearly one of them. Bethany set the lamp on a nearby crate and wrapped her arms around herself. What if Billy doesn't deliver your message? Or worse, what if Garrison decides to escalate further? Then we'll be ready, Kieran assured her, fighting the urge to pull her into his arms. The sight of her in her nightclothes, her honey blonde hair cascading down her back, was doing strange things to his concentration. But I have a feeling Garrison is too calculating for direct violence. He prefers to work through others, keep his hands clean. Like the sheriff, Bethany sighed. What a mess. Go back to bed, Kieran suggested gently. I'll keep watch the rest of the night. Bethany hesitated. You need sleep too. I've gone longer without it. When she still didn't move, he added, I promise I'll wake you if anything else happens. Finally, she nodded and retrieved her lamp. Thank you, Kieran. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here tonight. You'd have handled it, he said with more confidence than he felt. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. A small smile touched her lips. Good night, then. Good night, Bethany. As she disappeared back into the store, Kieran exhaled slowly. The protective instinct he felt toward her was growing stronger by the hour. It wasn't just about their arrangement anymore. Somewhere in the past 24 hours, her safety had become personally important to him. That realization was both comforting and terrifying. The attempted arson changed things. The next morning, over breakfast, Kieran laid out his concerns. Garrison's getting desperate. If he's willing to resort to arson, there's no telling what he might try next. What do you suggest? Bethany asked, cradling her coffee cup between her hands. Despite her calm demeanor, Kieran could see the worry in her eyes. We need leverage, something to make Garrison back off completely. Like what? Information, Kieran stated. Men like Garrison didn't get where they are without cutting corners, making enemies, or breaking laws. If we can find evidence of wrongdoing, we can use it to negotiate. Bethany considered this. There have been rumors about how he acquired some of his properties, especially the Reynolds place on the edge of town. Old man Reynolds swore he'd never sell, then suddenly signed over the deed and left town the next day. That's a start, Kieran nodded. I'll look into it. In the meantime, you should never be alone, especially after dark. I can't have you guarding me constantly, Bethany protested. You have your own search to conduct. I'm not leaving you unprotected, Kieran said firmly. Not now that we know what Garrison is capable of. Their eyes met across the table and something shifted in the air between them. Bethany was the first to look away. What about your man Crane? Have you found any trace of him? Nothing concrete, Kieran admitted. But a saloon girl mentioned a man who fits his description passing through about 3 weeks ago. Called himself Vincent Carson and was flush with cash. He lost heavily at cards, got into a fight and headed south. Toward Tucson, that's my guess. But I want to be certain before I follow the trail. What Kieran didn't say was that for the first time since he'd begun hunting Crane, he was feeling conflicted about his mission. The need for justice remained strong, but the thought of leaving Bethany to face Garrison alone was increasingly unacceptable. That day set a new pattern for them. Kieran would help in the store during the busy periods, then use the quieter hours to investigate both Crane's whereabouts and Garrison's business dealings. Bethany found herself looking forward to his returns, enjoying their conversations over meals and the comfortable silences that fell between them as they worked. A week passed without further incidents. Billy Tanner had apparently delivered Kieran's message, as Garrison's men kept their distance, merely watching the store from across the street. The sheriff, too, seemed to be avoiding direct confrontation, though his glares whenever he passed the store made his feelings clear. On Saturday evening, as Bethany was preparing to close the store after a busy day, Mrs. Elliott, the dressmaker's wife, came in for a last-minute purchase. "My dear," she said conspiratorially once Kieran had stepped into the storeroom, "everyone's talking about your handsome protector." "Is there something romantic brewing?" Bethany felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Addison is simply a friend who's helping out temporarily." "Such a shame," Mrs. Elliott sighed. "You two look so well suited, and a woman in your position needs a husband, especially with all this trouble with Garrison." "I've managed on my own so far," Bethany pointed out, trying to keep the edge from her voice. She'd heard similar sentiments from several customers recently. "Of course, dear, but a woman alone is always vulnerable in these territories, and Mr. Addison seems so capable." Mrs. Elliott leaned closer. "Though there are rumors about his past." "What sort of rumors?" Bethany asked, her protective instincts flaring despite her better judgment. "Well, they say he was quite the feared bounty hunter. Some even whisper he wasn't always particular about bringing his quarry in alive." Mrs. Elliott's eyes gleamed with the excitement of sharing gossip. "Of course, I don't believe such tales. Neither should anyone else," Bethany said firmly. "Mr. Addison is an honorable man." After Mrs. Elliott left, Bethany found herself troubled by the conversation. She had come to trust Kieran implicitly over the past week, but realized she still knew very little about his past as a bounty hunter. Was there truth to the rumors? When Kieran returned from the storeroom, he immediately sensed her disquiet. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just tired, it's been a long day." He clearly didn't believe her but didn't press the issue. "Why don't you go upstairs and rest? I'll finish closing up." Bethany nodded gratefully and retreated to her quarters, where she sat by the window watching the last light fade from the sky. She was being foolish, she knew. Whatever Kieran had done in his past, he had shown nothing but decency and honor since arriving in Willa Creek. And if she was honest with herself, her discomfort stemmed less from doubt about his character than from her growing feelings for him, feelings that complicated their arrangement and threatened her hard-won independence. Downstairs, Kieran methodically checked the doors and windows, his mind on the woman upstairs. Something had upset her, and he suspected it had to do with the whispered conversation he'd partially overheard. The townspeople were talking, speculating about their relationship, and no doubt dredging up stories about his past. He grimaced at the thought. Bethany deserved better than to have her reputation tarnished by association with a man like him. Perhaps it would be best if he accelerated his search for Crane and moved on quickly for her sake. The idea of leaving her brought an unexpected pang of regret. In just a week, Bethany Knight had somehow worked her way past his carefully maintained defenses. Her courage, intelligence, and quiet strength had awakened feelings he'd thought long buried after years of hunting men through the harshest territories of the West. As he climbed the stairs to join her for their customary evening meal, Kieran resolved to keep a tighter rein on those feelings. Bethany had already lost one man she loved. The last thing she needed was to attach herself to another who lived with danger as a constant companion. The evening passed quietly, their conversation more restrained than usual. After dinner, Kieran surprised Bethany by producing a worn deck of cards. "Thought you might enjoy a game," he suggested. "Unless you'd prefer to read," Bethany welcomed the diversion. "What game did you have in mind?" "Do you know poker?" she laughed. "My uncle taught me when I was 12. My mother was scandalized." "Let's see if his lessons took then," Kieran said with a smile, dealing the cards. They played for matchsticks rather than money, and Bethany proved to be a formidable opponent. Her face gave nothing away as she considered her cards, and she bluffed with such conviction that Kieran found himself losing more often than winning. "You're dangerous," he commented after she took another pot. "Good thing we're not playing for real stakes." "Uncle Morris always said I had a natural talent for deception," she replied with a mischievous smile. Not a quality Boston society appreciated in a young lady. Their loss, Kieran said, shuffling the deck. Out here, knowing when to bluff and when to fold can be a valuable skill. Is that how you've survived all these years? Knowing when to bluff, the question seemed innocent enough, but Kieran sensed an underlying current. Sometimes, though in my line of work, it was usually better to have the strongest hand. Bethany hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind all evening. Were you good at your job, Kieran, as a bounty hunter? Yes, he answered honestly. I brought in over 30 men wanted for serious crimes. Alive, so that was it, she'd heard the rumors. Kieran set the cards down and met her gaze directly. Whenever possible. I've had to kill in self-defense more times than I care to remember, but I never hunted with the intention of bringing back a corpse instead of a prisoner, despite what some stories might claim. Bethany nodded slowly, searching his face. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. You have every right to know who's sharing your roof. His voice was gentle. I've done things I'm not proud of, Bethany, the life I've led. It changes a man. But I've never taken a life except when there was no other choice. I believe you, she said simply, and Kieran was surprised by how much those 3 words meant to him. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotion. Finally, Bethany gathered the cards, her fingers brushing his as she took the deck. It's getting late, she said softly. Perhaps we should continue tomorrow. Kieran nodded, rising from his chair. Sleep well, Bethany. You too. As he descended to his room behind the store, Kieran acknowledged that leaving Willa Creek and Bethany would be far harder than he'd anticipated. The next day brought unexpected news. While Bethany attended church services, something Kieran politely declined to join her, for he visited the saloon to continue his inquiries about Crane. There, he overheard a conversation that changed everything. When Bethany returned, he was waiting in the store, his expression grave. What is it? She asked immediately, removing her bonnet. Has something happened? Crane is dead, Kieran stated flatly. Killed in a gunfight in Nogales 2 weeks ago. Bethany set her bonnet aside slowly. Are you certain? As certain as I can be without seeing the body myself. 2 different men who knew him confirmed it. He tried to cheat at cards and was shot by the man he was attempting to swindle. Kieran, I don't know what to say. She studied his face, trying to gauge his reaction. Does this change your plans? The question hung in the air between them. For months, finding Crane had been Kieran's sole purpose. Now that quest had ended without the confrontation he'd anticipated, without the justice he'd sought for the widow's murder. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to ride to Nogales to confirm it for myself. Another part. Another part what? Bethany prompted when he fell silent. Another part wonders if it's time to stop chasing ghosts and start building something real. His eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. Your troubles with Garrison aren't resolved, Bethany. I could stay, help you secure your position here. The offer sent a rush of conflicting emotions through her, hope, fear, longing, all tangled together in a confusing knot. I can't ask you to put your life on hold for me, she said carefully. You didn't ask, I'm offering. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. Unless you'd prefer I move on. No, Bethany said quickly, too quickly. That is, I appreciate your help, of course, and I've enjoyed your company. A small smile touched his lips. I've enjoyed yours as well. More than I expected to. Before their conversation could continue, the store's bell jangled as someone entered. Bethany turned to find Tommy Matthews racing toward her, his young face flushed with excitement. Miss Knight, Miss Knight. There's a big fight at the saloon between Sheriff Halley and Judge Henderson. The judge is saying the sheriff's been taking bribes from Mr. Garrison to harass you and other folks who won't sell their properties. Kieran and Bethany exchanged startled looks before Kieran asked, When did this start, Tommy? Just now. Pa sent me to fetch you, Mr. Addison. He says you might want to hear what the judge is saying about Mr. Garrison's business deals. Tell your father I'll be right there, Kieran said, already reaching for his hat. I'm coming too, Bethany declared, reaching for her shawl. Bethany, a saloon is no place for a respectable woman. She finished with an arch of her eyebrow. This concerns me directly, Kieran, I'm coming. Recognizing the determination in her voice, Kieran nodded. Stay close to me. By the time they reached the Desert Rose Saloon, a crowd had gathered inside and spilled onto the boardwalk. Kieran pushed through gently but firmly, keeping Bethany close behind him. The normally rowdy saloon had fallen into a tense hush as Judge Henderson, his face flushed with anger, confronted Sheriff Halley before the bar. "I have sworn statements from 3 property owners that you threatened them with false charges if they didn't sell to Garrison," the elderly judge was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "And now, I find you've been dismissing legitimate complaints against his men for months. You've got no proof of anything," Sheriff Halley blustered, though his face had paled. "I have proof of everything," Judge Henderson countered, "including your sudden acquisition of prime grazing land despite your modest sheriff's salary. Land purchased, coincidentally, just after the Reynolds property changed hands under suspicious circumstances." A murmur ran through the crowd. Near the back, Kieran spotted Edmund Garrison watching with a carefully neutral expression that didn't quite hide the calculation in his eyes. "What's more," the judge continued, producing a sheaf of papers from his coat pocket, "I have here documents showing that Mr. Garrison has been falsifying property deeds, including an attempt to forge Miss Knight's signature on a bill of sale for her store." At this revelation, all eyes turned to Bethany, who stood straight-backed beside Kieran, her surprise evident but her composure intact. "That's a damned lie," Garrison shouted, pushing forward. "Judge, you're making accusations that could ruin me based on hearsay and forgeries." "The only forgeries here are the ones you've created, Garrison," Judge Henderson replied coldly. "I've sent for the federal marshal. He should arrive by tomorrow's stage to investigate these matters properly." Garrison's face contorted with rage. "You senile old fool, you can't prove anything." "I believe I already have," the judge replied calmly. "Sheriff Halley, consider yourself relieved of duty pending the marshal's investigation. Mr. Thompson," he addressed the deputy who stood nearby, looking uncomfortable, "you will assume the sheriff's responsibilities temporarily." Halley's hand moved toward his gun, but Kieran stepped forward, his own hand resting casually near his holster. "I wouldn't, Sheriff. That would only add to your troubles." The sheriff glared at Kieran, but let his hand fall away from his weapon. Garrison, however, was not so easily cowed. "This is absurd," he spat. "I'm the most important businessman in this town. Without me, Willa Creek would still be a dusty nothing of a settlement. You all owe me your livelihoods." "What we owe, Mr. Garrison," Judge Henderson stated firmly, "is a debt to justice and honest dealing qualities you've demonstrated a remarkable lack of." The mood in the saloon was shifting palpably as townsfolk, who had previously feared Garrison's influence, began to murmur among themselves, sharing stories of intimidation and unfair practices they'd endured. Sensing he was losing control of the situation, Garrison made a desperate move. He lunged toward Bethany, grabbing her arm roughly. "This is your doing, isn't it? You and your gunslinger." Kieran moved instantly, breaking Garrison's grip and pushing Bethany behind him. "Touch her again, and it will be the last thing you do," he warned, his voice deadly quiet. "You threatening me, bounty hunter?" Garrison sneered, though he kept his distance. "No threats," Kieran replied evenly, "just a promise." Judge Henderson intervened before the situation could escalate further. "Mr. Garrison, I suggest you return to your home and prepare to answer the marshal's questions. Attempting to intimidate witnesses will only worsen your position." For a moment, it seemed Garrison might defy the judge. Then, with a final venomous glare at Bethany and Kieran, he stormed out of the saloon, shoving past the onlookers. As the crowd began to disperse, discussing the dramatic confrontation in excited whispers, Judge Henderson approached Bethany. "Miss Knight, I owe you an apology. I suspected Garrison's tactics for some time, but lacked the evidence to act until recently." "How did you discover the forgery, Your Honor?" Bethany asked. "Mr. Reynolds returned secretly last night," the judge explained. "He's been hiding in Tucson, fearing for his life after Garrison threatened his family. His testimony, along with documents he preserved, provided the final pieces I needed." "And Sheriff Halley," Kieran inquired, "will he face charges?" "Most certainly," the judge nodded. though I expect he'll turn state's evidence against Garrison in exchange for leniency. Men like Hallie rarely demonstrate courage when their own freedom is at stake. As they walked back to the store, Bethany was uncharacteristically quiet, processing the sudden turn of events. "Are you all right?" Kieran asked gently. "I think so," she replied. "It's just, after months of fighting, to have it end so suddenly seems almost unreal." "It's not fully resolved yet," Kieran cautioned. "Garrison is desperate and dangerous. Until the marshal arrives and takes him into custody, we should remain vigilant." Bethany nodded, then surprised him by slipping her hand into his. "Thank you, Kieran, for everything." The simple touch sent warmth spreading through him. He squeezed her hand lightly. "No need for thanks." "I'm glad I could help." When they reached the store, Bethany unlocked the door but hesitated before entering. "What will you do now?" she asked, turning to face him. With Crane dead and Garrison soon to be arrested, the question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Kieran had asked himself the same thing since hearing of Crane's death. For years, he'd lived without putting down roots, moving from one bounty to the next. The prospect of staying in one place, of building a life with someone, was both appealing and terrifying. But looking at Bethany now, her blue eyes filled with a hope she was trying to conceal, Kieran realized he'd already made his decision. "I thought I might stay in Willa Creek," he said slowly. "If there's a reason for me to." Bethany's breath caught. "Is there?" "I think there could be." Kieran stepped closer, raising his hand to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "If you wanted me to stay." "I do," she admitted softly. "Very much." The distance between them diminished as Kieran leaned down, his lips finding hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with all the emotion they'd been restraining. Bethany's arms slipped around his neck as she responded with equal fervor, pressing closer to him. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. "When I rode into Willa Creek, I was only looking for vengeance." "And I never expected you," Bethany replied with a smile. "The mysterious bounty hunter who stood up for me when no one else would." "Ex-bounty hunter," he corrected. "I think it's time for a new profession." "What did you have in mind?" "Well," Kieran said thoughtfully, "a general store seems like a good business to be part of. Steady, respectable. And the current owner might be persuaded to take on a partner." Bethany's smile widened. "She might indeed, though there would need to be some negotiations on the terms." "I'm an excellent negotiator," Kieran assured her, drawing her close again. "But perhaps we should continue this discussion inside." Judge Henderson's prediction proved accurate. The federal marshal arrived the next day and, based on the evidence compiled by the judge, arrested both Garrison and Hallie. As expected, the former sheriff quickly turned on his employer, providing additional details about their scheme to force property owners to sell at below-market prices for Garrison's hotel project. The arrests caused a sensation in Willa Creek. Suddenly, people who had avoided Bethany's store for fear of offending Garrison became regular customers, often staying to chat and apologize for their previous reticence. Business flourished, and Bethany found herself in need of the help Kieran readily provided. Over the following weeks, their partnership, both personal and professional, deepened. Kieran proved to have a good head for business, and his presence discouraged the few troublemakers who might have considered taking advantage of a woman shopkeeper. More importantly, their feelings for each other grew stronger with each passing day. The evenings they spent together, talking long into the night, helped heal wounds they both carried from their pasts. Kieran spoke of the darkness he'd seen as a bounty hunter and his fear that it had changed him irrevocably. Bethany shared her grief over her fiancé's death and her struggle to forge a new identity far from everything familiar. A month after Garrison's arrest, on a cool autumn evening, Kieran and Bethany walked together along the creek that gave the town its name. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, reflecting off the water's surface. "I received a letter from the territorial governor today," Bethany mentioned as they paused on a small footbridge. "Garrison has been convicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. He'll spend at least 10 years in prison." "Justice can be slow, but it usually arrives eventually," Kieran commented. Are you relieved? Immensely, she admitted. Though it's strange I spent so long fighting him that it's almost disorienting to have that struggle suddenly ended. Now you can focus on building rather than just defending, Kieran said, taking her hand. The store is doing well. You've won the respect of the town. Your future here is secure. Our future, Bethany corrected gently, squeezing his hand. Kieran's expression grew serious. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, actually. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Bethany's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small diamond. Bethany Knight, Kieran said, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. You're the bravest, most determined woman I've ever known. You faced down threats and intimidation without flinching. You gave me a reason to stop hunting shadows and start building something real. Will you marry me? Tears filled Bethany's eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Kieran was struck by how far they'd both come since that confrontation on the main street just 2 months earlier. The sheriff had accused her of starting trouble. He had offered himself as a substitute target. Neither of them could have imagined where that moment would lead. Kieran pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership, respect, and love. You know, Bethany murmured against his lips, the sheriff was wrong that day. About what? He said I started it, she reminded him with a mischievous smile. But I think we both know it was Garrison all along. Kieran laughed softly. True, though I'm grateful for whatever or whoever started it. Otherwise, I might have ridden right through Willa Creek without stopping. And I'd still be fighting my battles alone, Bethany added. Neither of us is alone anymore, Kieran said, holding her close as the last light of day faded into twilight. And that's a fine ending to our story. Not an ending, Bethany corrected, her blue eyes bright with happiness. A beginning. The wedding took place in December, with Judge Henderson officiating. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the store decorated with evergreens and ribbons for the occasion. Even Tommy Matthews had a role, proudly bearing the rings on a small cushion. As Bethany and Kieran spoke their vows, many commented on how perfectly matched they seemed, the strong, independent store owner and the former bounty hunter who had found peace at last. Their story quickly became part of Willa Creek's folklore. How a confrontation in the street led to an unlikely alliance, which blossomed into love strong enough to overcome corruption and danger. In the spring, they expanded the store, adding a section for books and school supplies at Bethany's insistence. Every growing town needs education, she declared, and Kieran supported her vision wholeheartedly. By the following winter, they welcomed their first child, a daughter with Bethany's blue eyes and Kieran's dark hair. As Kieran held his newborn daughter, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed since riding into Willa Creek in search of vengeance. What are you thinking? Bethany asked from the bed, tired but radiant. That I'm the luckiest man in the Arizona Territory, he replied honestly, sitting beside her and placing their daughter in her arms. When the sheriff said you started trouble and I offered to start with me instead, I had no idea we'd end up here. Who ended first, do you think? Bethany asked with a smile, recalling his challenge from that first day. Kieran brushed a tender kiss against her forehead. Neither of us, and that's the best part of our story, it's nowhere near its end. As their daughter slept peacefully between them, Bethany and Kieran shared a look of perfect understanding. The troubles that had brought them together had been overcome. The path ahead, while surely not without its challenges, would be traveled together with the strength, determination, and love they had found in each other. And in Willa Creek, Arizona Territory, the tale was often told of the spirited store owner and the former bounty hunter who stood against corruption and found something neither had been looking for, a love as vast and enduring as the western sky.